I'm very happy to be having a dialogue with my dear friend and colleague, Leonard Muellner, since he has worked so hard on this particular passage as the camera zooms in on one particular scene in the city of peace.
Right.
And it's a litigation, which in Homeric poetry is described as a quarrel.
Right.
But the precise meaning of the Greek word is what matters, Neikos.
Right.
Quarrel is just a translation. And you think of the other quarrels, and Natasha and I talked about that in part one of our analysis of this passage, where there's the quarrel, of course, between Agamemnon and Achilles,
right.
But there's even the quarrel between Hesiod and Perses in the Works and Days.
Use the same word, Neikos.
The same word,
yep.
Neikos. And so Neikos is a very precise word for the kind of context that's being described here.
Right.
But I wonder if you could talk a little bit, Lenny, about what this kind of situation would have been like, let's say, in the second millennium BCE, let's say somewhere around, I don't know, 1320 or 1200.
We have this amazing thing because we have a text from the Bronze Age in a script called Linear B, which describes a legal dispute, and it uses the same word here for the speaking of a complaint, okay, in a legal context. It's the only time in all of attested Greek literature that it occurs in that context. And the only other place that it occurs anywhere is in this Linear B tablet to describe two people who are disputing who owns a piece of land and how and under what circumstances. So the tablets in Linear B are bureaucratic tablets from a Bronze Age society that was highly sophisticated and had an elaborate bureaucratic system for counting things, for keeping track of things, and recording. This is one of the most interesting tablets, recording a legal dispute. So the language here, it reflects the language in the tablet in actually in two ways, because there's one word that's used for the first assertion and an unmarked word for making a claim, a legal claim, that's used in the second, that occurs also in the tablet. And then in the Linear B tablet, there's a reference to this entity called the dēmos, okay, which occurs also in this passage as being
translated here as district.
As district.
It's a feeble attempt to convey the idea that this entity has its own customary laws.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of a if you're looking forward from the Bronze Age here, there's a lot that remains the same in the way it's depicted in the Homeric text. An amazing kind of testament to the durability of traditional diction and the poetic system.
And Lenny, if you could talk a little bit about the word Eukhesthai, which is in our text.
Okay.
As you see here.
Yes, which is the word for the first one. That's the marked word for making a legal claim.
Line 499.
Yes, and as I said, this is the only place in the text of Homer that it's used for a legal claim. Most of the time it's warriors on the battlefield claiming that he's better and stronger and more going to kill the other guy because he's better and stronger.
And then we usually translate that as
boast. Yeah, but it really means make a serious assertion of superiority.
There you go.
Yeah, and the other context in which it occurs is in prayers. It's the kind of word used to describe a speech destined for the other world, the powers in the other world. Very highly marked kind of speech.
Yes.
Yep. So it's extraordinary to see it in this context, but really makes sense.
I just love it.
Yep.
And so going back to your point, and I think it's a major breakthrough that in this one text, in Homeric poetry, which we call Homer shorthand, that is to say the Iliad and the Odyssey, in this one text, Eukhesthai means legally declare.
Legally declare, yes.
And I didn't say that as accurately as I can, but let's just for the moment say it that way.
It means make a legal speech act. How about that?
That's
right.
Good.
Yep.
And then next thing you know, this meaning is also attested in the Linear B tablet.
Exactly.
That records a litigation between a priestess and the dēmos, which
Yes.
is how they used to pronounce dēmos
Yes.
back in the second millennium BCE. Just amazing.
Yep. Yep.
And then I'd also like for you to mention a little bit how this word Eukhesthai, let's say eukto in the past,
Right.
how that would pop up in other Indo-European languages.
So this is a word with cognates in Sanskrit, in Avestan, the language of Zoroastrianism. So that's the most famous in the famous book by Nietzsche, Also Sprach Zarathustra.
Yes.
The word for speak, Sprach, is in Avestan the cognate of Eukhesthai. So it's incredibly powerfully marked speech by the prophet himself.
It's augda, and augda is
exactly.
a direct cognate.
Exactly.
With, eukto in ancient Greek.
Right.
And what we have here is a cognate of this very old way of saying things.
Right.
And what do you make of the elders and the scepters that they hold? Natasha and I talked about it as a case of visualizing something that in real life involves taking turns.
Right.
Somebody has the turn to speak, so they
Right.
hold the sceptron.
Right.
Then the next person
Right.
holds the
So
sceptron.
it's a
But here it's
community.
the plural.
Yes,
Oh,
it's a community enforcer, right? In a certain sense, right? The
Yes.
power to speak is something that's shared, and it
Beautiful.
goes from one person to another. But implicitly, it belongs to everyone, right?
And then Natasha was asking me, and curious how you would answer is, well, what would the histor really think? Here are the litigants, and one of them, the defendant making one claim, one of them, the plaintiff making another claim.
Right.
And then there's a circle of elders, which is
Trying to
somehow
figure out,
sacred,
yes.
trying to figure it out,
Yeah.
trying to get the best formula for arbitrating this dispute.
Right.
But then there's the assembly
Right.
surrounding
We're
them.
also
And-
involved.
And then where do you stop the expanding circles? You really can't until you reach
no.
the present.
Right.
But going back to Natasha's question, so
But even the more immediate circle of the poem, it has a relevance to, right?
Yeah.
Not even between the Shield and Achilles himself and his story, there is an important parallel, right, which we talked about before. Yeah.
and so wouldn't it be interesting to ask our readers, well, if you were an arbitrator,
Which side would you come down on?
yes, and how would you do it? What criteria would you use?
Right.
Would you say that something is right or wrong, or would you say something is fair or unfair,
Right.
or what?
So to me, I think what the scene represents is a kind of, by definition, an insoluble sort of problem, right?
I like that. Yes.
And what Achilles did when he refused to accept the ransom was something that no one really knows how to treat from the point of view of justice.
Yes.
Because it's a thing that no one has thought of doing, so to speak.
Well, another way to put it is that in the Homeric Iliad and Homeric Odyssey, people don't talk that way. They don't
Yes.
say, oh, that was an unjust thing for you to do.
Right,
or,
right.
Oh, that was very
Yes.
just. Or
Yes.
this is absolute justice.
Yes.
That kind of
It doesn't
discourse
work. Yeah.
works in Hesiodic poetry.
Right.
But there, the perspective is the present.
Yes.
Technically, he's in the
courtroom
Iron Age, in the
of something.
present.
Yes.
Whereas these characters are in the heroic past.
Right.
They're stuck in the heroic
That's right.
past. So how do they communicate with the present?
Beautiful. Oh, all right. I love that way of looking at it.